Hi, Joel. In the world of corporate travel, many talk about net zero, and a few just actually cracked the code of really scaling reduction across a global giant. Joining me today is Joel Schneider, who's the sustainability travel lead at Allianz Commercial. And Joel has been at the forefront of moving Allianz, let's say, from a napkin-based reporting world to a more granular automated reality, hitting actually a massive 40% reduction ahead of schedule. So welcome to you, Joel. Hi.
Hey Dad, thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be on this.
Great.
And yes, it's been a busy time.
Yeah, I know that from our past conversations, and I'm really excited to dive into basically how you turn those 50 commercial units that you have into one cohesive sustainability engine. And I think what's very important for that is to have a look at your role first, because your role of being a dedicated sustainability travel manager is still relatively rare. And most similar situations are, let's say, tucked under procurement of finance. And at Allianz, you sit really in the sustainability team. And I would be curious how this affects basically your impact on the organization, what your role has included, basically that's different from, let's say, the regular travel management first roles.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's been a very interesting journey, certainly coming into Allianz and taking on this side of it. From my background, legacy background in business travel, I've worked with financial services organizations, predominantly in banking, and then coming over into this engagement, it's been a real change because, as you say, the function belongs, the business travel program is owned by sustainable operations, which would typically sit within finance, procurement, and so on. So when they took ownership of it, they decided they were going to build a sustainable travel team to fit with that. So it was predominantly already made up of sustainable specialists, but they needed a corporate travel specialist to understand that part of the world and come together. And with that, it's been really, we've gone into a lot of areas of our program, pretty much every facet of our program. We've had to look at and analyze and see that how can we improve this to deliver on our sustainable objectives. So really, in terms of us leading our program from a decision-making point, it's really led by our data emissions. So really, what are we emitting? How are we collecting it? What are our points of collection? Which suppliers we work with? And that's really, really important with us. So we've had to do a complete redesign of our program and even a huge roadmap that's come with it. That's been still going to be going on for some time. A lot of the areas that we influence in our policy. So we've just done another global update at group level of our global travel regulations. So we've engaged a lot of areas to improve there in terms of the thresholds for business travel, what can be permitted in there. Really kind of doing the guidance for taking rail options over flights, as well as really encouraging kind of electrifying fleets. So whether it's going to be car rental or even own a corporate fleet, really kind of going through as much electric options that can be possibly available, certainly within the locations that they're based. And then also we've even had to bring in mandates for our own travel providers that they have their own specific commitments to net zero. That's also really important for who we work with.
Okay, sounds super interesting. And I mean, by that you're already touching, let's say, the obvious levers and the not so obvious levers. And what I feel is interesting is many say, okay, go rail first, but then reality hits, right? And people still do what they want. So can you talk a little bit about what maybe were the obvious levers for, let's say, this 40% cut? In some organizations, I read actually it's already 60% achieved. So what were the obvious and not so obvious levers in getting to those high reduction numbers?
Absolutely. I think even the point that we've already kind of gone over is the fact that we've moved the ownership of the travel program into sustainable operations, and therefore there's that direct influence of people that are very passionate about sustainability and us not just reaching our targets, exceeding them, and that we have that ownership and it's led by us. We've also had the benefit of introducing carbon budgets, so that requires a great responsibility for our individual businesses to then take ownership of those travel emissions and really monitor those to make sure that we're not going over, or if we go under, that's absolutely fine, but we kind of adhere to those targets, and that's given us the opportunity to even exceed them in a lot of areas. One benefit that's really, really been important to us, I think that's had a big part of our success today, is the fact that we have a very, very supportive, engaged board and senior management. So they're really keen on what we're doing. We do regular performance reports to them, so it's tracking. They really get involved, and they want to know all the areas of it, and that I think gives us a real top-down influence when we guide us as a business.
Yeah. What I feel is super interesting is many big organizations look for those carbon budgets and also technical solutions. How have you actually implemented that? Is that across Allianz Commercial or across the entire organization? And how actually can you track those carbon budgets with your teams?
Absolutely. So this is something that is Allianz wide. Speaking for commercial, we have our own methodology that we use. It's the same methodology across the whole organization, all 50 units. And then from that, we will take our reporting, which is done on a 6-month basis and a 12-month basis. That's tracked then monthly. And budgets are really worked then out by department and even right down to the cost center. So they will be allocated their emissions every year, and that's what they'll have for the year to use, and then it's tracked on a monthly basis so that everyone knows exactly what they have, what they're spending, and then really what they might even have left over at the end of the year. And that's when this all goes into our own targets, that then goes into one of 50 businesses goes into our group results.
Okay. And is there anything where you would say like what brings people to adhere to those targets? Are there any consequences of that? Is that really the, let's say, altruistic, how can I say, altruistic types of persons that follow this? Or do you have like hard incentives behind those targets as well? Because I feel this is oftentimes where, we see different results in different companies, and especially in those companies where we see those big reduction achievements actually, they're typically tied to somewhat of C-level or similar reduction goals. Is that the case for Allianz as well?
It's a very good question. I would say, again, it goes back to where I think a lot of our success does come from, the fact that we've got a very engaged board and senior management, and they lead by a really good example. So there is always going to need to be exceptions. Business cases, sales teams are always going to need to travel a lot. But I think when it goes beyond that, in terms of our own individual business travel, it's very, very mindful in what we do. And really, we have to have good business justifications for someone to then take that physical travel. There needs to be a really thorough requirement for it. So we haven't made it impossible for travel. We've just made it it's more really necessary travel. And through that, we've been able to eliminate a lot of emissions.
And I guess also a lot of costs, which is typically the co-benefit of that part.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's we always have the finance team on board whenever we're doing our business cases to make another optimization in the program.
All right, I feel this is super interesting, and we see that with many companies at the moment, right? Like this financial aspect also of sustainability, financial sustainability, let's say, dominates at the moment many organizations. What I feel now would be a big challenge, right? You said already you have 50 units and all work pretty separately from each other. So how did you move this entire organization from, let's say, rather ancient reporting style towards these new, requirements and bringing it all together? And I can imagine 50 units is one thing, but, probably it's also more than 50 countries or so. So how did you get towards, the global reporting?
Certainly. So, I mean, really only be able to speak for commercial, where I'm based, really with us, because out of the 50 businesses, commercial are probably the busiest in terms of business travel. Therefore, we have to be the most engaged, not just with our own program, but then with how we do our reporting. I believe that we've been able to set a really good example that the whole organization needs to to field. So, for instance, we all have to follow the same methodology. Some of the businesses, some of the units will not need to travel as much as others. So we've been able to build a really good example, a really good process that's now followed out. So everyone's using the same methodologies, everyone's having to use the same calculations when they calculate their data, and then they're also having to upload it into the same centralized database. So it's still a work in progress. There's a lot going on there, but I feel like we've been able to make some really, really good achievements in that area.
I guess that's also a co-benefit of being the sustainability travel lead, right? So you can organize everyone participating.
Yeah, I wouldn't put near as much the credit there on that. There are a really, really good team of data professionals within the sustainability team that really lead that. So yeah, it's a real group effort with that.
Okay, so what you're saying is you have an expert team ultimately on board that does not much more than this collection piece. Is that correct?
Oh no. So yeah, we'll have like our environmental data analysts. We'll even have project specialists within data. So there'll be some that primarily will just work on the data, but then there'll be others that are really engaged between the data and the projects around them in terms of enhancements and even the coordination and the maintenance of that data. So it's quite a varied team in terms of like there's not one member that does everything, if that makes.
I imagine at that scale, pretty sure. Reaching a little bit the end of our session already, I would be very curious how we see the world in 10 years from now. And we know in 10 years from now, many companies will have achieved, hopefully, their 50% cuts. You are already very close to that, but I guess the final mile will be the hardest one, right? And I would be curious, speaking for Allianz, but also other global players that are advanced, where do you see we will struggle most getting closer to that finish line?
Yeah, so I had a thought about this one, and I do believe one thing that's incredibly important is that corporate buyers of travel do remain competitive with reaching that target. I do think it's really important for businesses to want that accolade to not only be maybe one of the first to achieve it, but to actually achieve it and to keep moving forward to that. There's a lot of developments and industry trends that are making that harder and harder, and I think as long as collectively, regardless of industry, corporate buyers keep moving towards that goal, then that's really the main thing that's going to happen. I think also with that, a lot of it will come down to industry suppliers to keep being able to offer us innovative products that help us reach that. I think one thing that would be really, really important would be somewhere where we can have centralized aggregated rail content. So regardless of where someone is based by point of sale, they're able to access that content in a holistic solution, and then with that, that's a great way of mitigating domestic rail or even cross-country rail as opposed to taking air options. And then really it's then kind of down to even areas of electrifying completely fleets for whether it be rideshare options or rental cars. There's a lot of work that could be done there, and I think corporate buyers will be buying the solutions and using the products if they're there. So it's a partnership between the two. And I think one thing that would make a big difference, we've had CSRD roll out. I think when there's more global alliance on these areas and there's even mandates on the transparency of emissions reporting for travel and then also the best way of reducing it, I think there is definitely some work to be done there, certainly on a global scale. Like feeling on a really positive note, from my experience, certainly the last 2 years of working with Allianz, there's a real push from even current business travelers to the new business travelers that are coming through. They really want to do the right thing. They don't want to be doing any more emissions than they have to. They want to make sure it's business essential what they're doing. And I do feel like there is a really positive movement that is coming out of that, certainly from the younger generations.
Yeah, and I hope many companies can learn something from Allianz and how you've been doing things. Let's see where we stand in 10 years, or if we can even accelerate that. Joel, thank you very much for the time. It was great having you here.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we can do this again in 10 years and talk about the great things that have happened.
Let's do. I would be very curious. Ciao, ciao.
Wonderful. Thank you.